Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
We are not in the same business of all these other organizations. We are focused wholly on creating content that makes a difference in people's lives.
Coming up on Dialogue, she's the longest-serving president of the Public Broadcasting Service. A conversation with Paula Kerger about her goals and challenges next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. When my guest today took over as the 6th president and CEO of PBS in 2006, some pundits opined that she might not have all her wits about her. One even told her that if she succeeded, she should have her likeness chiseled on Mount Rushmore. Hyperbole aside, Paula Kerger did have a rather Sisyphean task. PBS was facing some hard economic times, not to mention continuing disagreements over its role. Nearly a decade later, the public broadcasting entity, which has a budget of more than $340 million and provides programming to more than 350 stations, seems to be on more solid financial ground. It's entered the digital age in a big way, and it's had some hits, among them Downton Abbey. But it's also weathered its share of controversy and still has challenges as it competes in a new media landscape. And here to talk about her vision for PBS is its president, Paula Kerger. Welcome.
Marcia, it's so fun to be here. I forgot about that Mount Rushmore comment. Of course, I'm having a flashback now as you're talking. Wow, 10 years.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, last time we talked, it was 2007, so
That's
8
it.
years ago as we said.
Yeah.
Not that long in terms of time, but really revolutionary in terms of the changes that have occurred in our industry since then. I mean, among them, we have these little guys.
No Twitter, no Facebook.
Yeah, and all the apps.
Yeah.
Is that what you think has changed the most in your decade-long tenure?
Yeah, I think that, just the explosion of opportunities to connect to content has really profoundly changed. I mean, when we sat here in 2007, we were mostly focused on what would appear on a big screen in a living room and family room. Now, we still focus on that, but we're also thinking about how we create experiences for people whose television viewing may actually be on their tablet or
I meet more and more people
on that phone.
who don't even have a television set, they tell me.
Right. But you know what? They're still watching television. And it's interesting. Someone said to me not long ago, everyone really focuses on how much changes, but I think the smart organizations focus on what stays the same. And so for us, I really believe that whereas the way that we connect and even the form of some of the content has certainly changed since the last time that we sat in these chairs, perhaps these chairs. But the thing that is a constant is the commitment to the kinds of stories that we tell. Stories that focus on authentic voices, that are stories that make a difference in people's lives, that we hope are entertaining, but that are also educational, inspirational. And that's a through line. And that goes back to when public media was founded 50-some years ago.
Including a station founded by your grandfather, right?
That's right. He founded a radio
station.
But, look at this station, which is now celebrating 50 years. And you look at everything that has transpired in this station, and, it's changed a lot. But its commitment to serving the people across the state, its commitment to bringing the kinds of stories forward that create dialogue around important issues, that's a constant over 50 years.
And I definitely want to get to the content, but focusing a little bit more on this radical change that we've seen with the streaming, with the apps, and the delivery system. Do you envision a day where there won't even be broadcasting as we know it, that everything will come this way?
Well, there's a big debate right now about the future of broadcast, the future of spectrum. And I think that if you look at all technologies that have evolved, radio didn't go away when television was invented. In fact, I think that when television was created, it was called radio with pictures. And I think that to believe that things are going to somehow roll back to where they once were, I think is also a mistake. I think that the opportunity to reach a lot of people through broadcast is very powerful, and I'm not sure that's going to go away. And we talk about the need for broadcast television. There are a lot of people in the state I know that watch television over the air. And although there are lots of opportunities to connect content in different ways, the ability to do a one-to-many type of distribution, particularly during times of disaster, if you are anywhere that has worked through a disaster, whether it's a tornado or some nature event, you know that a lot of the mobile technology melts. And so I think that there is an important need to be able to deliver content to a lot of people. At the same time, we do have to pay attention to the fact that people are looking to access content when they want it and how they want it. And so you develop a little bit of a schizophrenic existence because you really want to be able to serve everyone in the way that they want to be served.
Well, and one way that you melded the two, the over-the-air and the streaming, was with the broadcast of the Roosevelts,
Yes.
where you let out all the online versions at the same time as the program.
It was a huge experiment.
I watched it on my iPad in the middle of the mountains because I was on an assignment, and I was able to stream it.
It's choice and convenience, and I think that's one of the things that, last year when we experimented with Roosevelts, and look, I am so grateful to Ken Burns for many reasons, but, his willingness to let us experiment with his baby, this massive series.
Because there could be a fear that if you let it out like that, nobody's going to watch the actual series.
And actually, I think to the contrary, what happened was, in fact, 33.5 million people watched it on television during that week, in addition to all the people that were streaming. There were people. So what we did is the first night, we broadcast the first episode, and at the end of the first broadcast, then we released the entire series. And there were 20,000, I can tell you the number, because you know these things through being able to count through digital, that did, within the first day and a half, watch the whole thing. I think they didn't sleep, they stayed up, they watched it all. But what most people did is, some did what you did, they were traveling, they couldn't watch it, and so streaming was more convenient. But what a lot of people did is they used it to catch up. They'd missed the first episode, maybe hadn't heard about it. People started talking about it. They caught up, then they came into broadcast. Then maybe they had other things and went out and came in. And you could see people were coming in and out of the series through broadcast and through digital. And I think that's what the future portends, is a little bit of both. What I think the digital did is it enabled people to be part of a television experience. And that's the weird thing about these times that we live in, is there are moments when people want to have collective experiences. Downton Abbey is a great example.
Yeah, and I was going to ask that. Let's move into content here. One big change since the time that you and I last talked in 2007 is Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
We're entering its last season, which I'm sure has some
makes a lot of people shudder.
Consternation for some people. What did this phenom do for PBS, first money-wise? Because I know you actually are looking at a financial picture that's different, in part because of Downton Abbey. You had a surplus of over $55 million in the last cycle.
So I think part of what Downton Abbey did is, I think it did a few things. One is, certainly it helped bring in resources that we've reinvested in content. And I think Downton Abbey was part of what has been helping our finances. The other is that is frankly philanthropy. We have a foundation at PBS, and over the last few years it's become an increasingly important way that we're helping to bring in more resources to complement the resources that come in through our stations, through their membership of PBS. But I think that what it also did is it brought a lot of people back to public television that probably hadn't watched in a while.
Since upstairs, downstairs.
It was multi-generational viewing. So I heard from a lot of people when I travel around, people thank me for the fact that that here's a show that they can watch with their kids and their grandkids and so forth. So it did bring more people in. But I think it also had a really powerful emotional role for those of us who work in public television, because I think for some people they weren't sure that we could ever have a big hit again. And I think it made people believe in the possibilities of what we could do. And so I think Downton Abbey was a truly extraordinary event that we tried to take advantage of by creating more drama. It allowed us to create more drama. We've had everything from Poldark, which was part of Masterpiece, to Call the Midwife, which is now in multiple seasons, to Selfridge, Indian Summer, a whole range of programs. An American drama that we're producing, Mercy Street, based on a true story of a family, takes place during the Civil War, family that had a home that was taken over by the Union forces. They were a Southern family. And during that period of our history is when modern emergency medicine was revolutionized. So it has lots of really interesting themes in it.
So is Mercy Street a response in some respects to the fact that all the hits that you're talking about, a lot of them are from Britain, from the BBC. So somebody could point to that and say, what about American drama?
There are a huge number of American stories that we wanted to tell, and our partnership with British drama is largely economic, so we're not investing wholly in any of the British dramas that we bring. We do it in partnership, and because of series like Downton Abbey, we've had a little bit of resources so we could take a risk, which on something that I've wanted to do. We haven't done an American drama in more than 10 years, and I've wanted to do it because I hear of all these really great stories that would be fantastic series I know the public would love.
So what's next after Downton Abbey? I mean, that's a hole in the lineup with it.
Well, Downton is, it's so funny. People have said to me, do you know Downton Abbey is ending? What are you going to do? It's like, well, we've known for a long time. When it was first produced, Julian Fellowes, the creator, said he would do 3 seasons. It's lasted for 6. And so, so a series like Mercy Street is one attempt at creating another series. Ones that we've had in the schedule, like Poldark and Indian Summer, Selfridge. All of these have been series that we've brought forward with the idea that we could potentially have them come back for additional series. Indian Summers is another. We're continuing to invest in a lot of drama. We have a number of dramas that are in development now. So rest assured that your Sunday nights will not be bereft of great drama, because we do have a lot in the pipeline.
One huge change is that HBO will now, in conjunction with Children's Television Workshop, have first rights on Sesame Street.
Mm-hmm.
Big Bird has been associated with public television almost since its inception. I think it came in 1970.
Yeah.
So.
And will continue.
Right.
And so the series continues on public broadcasting in
9 months
its
out
same place.
from its.
But Sesame Street as a series is largely reruns. They only produce a limited number of series of new shows every season. And so I think for the public, and for more importantly for kids, the presence of Sesame continues. Sesame Workshop, which is a separate nonprofit organization, has really struggled over the last few years to sustain itself. We provide some funding for Sesame, but not funding for the full series. And frankly, a lot of the funding for the series was off of the sale of DVDs and so forth, and that business is not quite what it once was. And so, HBO stepped forward and said, we'd like to help. And so part of their investment, they will get first run. I think we'll see how this works out. My concern is that Sesame remains available for kids, and this relationship will enable that.
From a public relations standpoint, though,
Mm-hmm.
Big Bird was always held up as, if you don't help fund PBS, Big Bird could go away. And You know,
Well, I think Big Bird is emblematic of a larger story, which is really the commitment that we have for kids programs. And, you know, we have 13 children's series on the air. We're launching 2 new series this year. We have
Jim Henson.
And
Productions.
Jim Henson continues to be part. Actually, Fred Rogers' legacy continues through some of the work that we've done, including Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is the most popular show on public television right now. So I think that, you know, from my perspective, when people talk about Sesame Street, what they're really talking about are programs that are not only safe for kids to watch, but that are also educational. I think it's a proxy for educational television.
But with cable moving in, not just cable, but premium, you know, this is a pay service, HBO. You know, people have said for years, well, PBS is the only place for this type of programming. Cable won't do it. And
well, I don't think cable, you know, there are channels on cable that are geared towards preschool.
So you don't think it hurts the message coming out of PBS?
No, I don't think so. Look, I'll tell you something that I bet no media executive would ever say, and that is that if we are doing work that also can inspire more similar work on commercial television, then we should claim victory. We certainly see that in science and natural history programming right now, where more are saying, look, we're now interested in doing more real science. That was actually an announcement that the head of Discovery made at the Television Critics Association press tour last year. I can't use his exact language because I'm not allowed to use it on television, but he basically said no more made up on Discovery. And they're doing that in part because our audiences have grown over the last few years. We're very different than any other media organization which has seen a decline in ratings. Our audiences have grown because I think people are hungering for more programming that actually is of significance and less reality shows. And so if we inspire more of that other places, then I think that is our role. I think the misunderstanding is that we are not in the same business of all these other organizations. We are focused wholly on creating content that makes a difference in people's lives. And I think other media organizations will dabble in that, but they're not going to define themselves by that kind of programming. And so I think it's unrealistic to think that an HBO or any of these children's cable services are going to focus on educational programming. They may have some in their schedule, but that is not how they're going to build their schedule, and that's not how they're going to define it. We are going to be there every year, every day of the year, creating programming that makes a difference for kids and that helps them, no matter what kind of home they live in, whether they have computers or books or none of that, only a television set. They have access to content that will enable those kids to walk into school on the first day ready and excited to learn. That's not the mission of HBO, and that's not the mission of any cable organization, and it's unfair to burden them with that. If they want to take some of the programming that we produce and extend it to a wider audience, or they want to create some programming that will also make a difference in kids' lives, that's fine. But I think that's not going to be their role for the long term. And that's why the public piece of public funding is important.
I want to ask you about some ethical issues that have come up in the last couple of years. I know that when I read the Facebook page for PBS, or even some letters that we get here, people seem to, you're walking an interesting tightrope, because on the one hand people think PBS is too liberal, and then some people say that PBS is now in the thrall of corporate America. There's an impression out there that somehow PBS in more recent years is being bought by corporate interests.
Well, I can tell you that the largest amount of money coming to public television comes from individual philanthropy. Corporate funding is actually on the decline. It is less a part of public broadcasting than it ever has been in its history. And that's not to say that we don't value our corporate partnerships. We do. We have wonderful relationships with a number of corporations who recognize that we are a place of quality and value, and absolutely understand that there is a firewall for any corporation that supports us that has nothing to do with the content. That relates to any funder, individuals or corporations.
Or a foundation. I mean, you've had to give back money in the past to a foundation that was associated with the topic on which the documentary they funded was about, which was pensions. I mean, so there are these standards that PBS has.
We do have standards, and in fact, the issue that you're talking about, the station that was involved, really was not clear about what they should have done in terms of and there was an absolute firewall there, but they gave the money back because they were concerned about the optics of it. So I think that the point is, the lion's share of money that comes to public broadcasting comes from individuals, and it comes from lots of individuals. We have a huge grassroots support, and if we violate that, people are smart. They recognize when something doesn't feel quite right, and they're going to walk away. So it is important to us from a moral perspective, but also from a business perspective, not to violate what has been an important part of the way that we've operated over the years, which is to make sure that there's integrity both in the content that we're producing and the relationships that we have with our funders.
Because individual philanthropists can also want a message to get out.
Of course,
and
that's
so
why I think we take this very seriously, and we put the scrutiny. I mean, the scrutiny happens at the station level where our programs come from, but also within PBS. We look very carefully at the funding mix of programs to make sure that there isn't that kind of influence.
As we start to wrap up, how is PBS going to reach out to a younger demographic with
Well,
this
I
programming?
think part of the opportunity is, one, you have to look at the stories that we tell. I think the other is the technology. And so the opportunity to distribute content on tablets and places where kids are. But the third is new spaces. And so we've started some work under the banner of Digital Studios, which is a YouTube space. And
so
so
the mashups of
and so we've got the
Mr.
mashups
Rogers
there,
and
but we also have
those are fun. The
we-
Garden of Your Mind.
yeah, but we also have people that work in the space that kids know, like the Green Brothers, who who do a series called Crash Course. And that really, I've always believed that the content we produce is interesting to a wider range. Kids are interested about the world around them. That's what really public television is all about. And so I think that to really be able to bring talent and people that are working in that space into the public media family is the way that we bring younger viewers in. And that's what the audience is. It's under 35. A lot of them are under 25. And they love it. And they're all wearing the vintage PBS shirts. So,
Paula, how is the upcoming what's been called spectrum repacking, and then the auction of various parts of the spectrum? How do you see that affecting the PBS landscape? Because I know when I talked to our chief engineer, just in the what's called the repacking, which we won't go into, 18 of our 47 translators stand to go dark.
Yeah, it's a big concern, and on the one hand, I mean, the FCC is moving forward with the auction, and so it is. It's not a debatable thing. And I think in some parts of the country there may be some resources that, particularly for stations that have multiple licenses, that may result in some revenue coming to public broadcasting. Some actually may go to their parent organizations. Some of our stations are owned by universities, for example, and they may be able to yield some resources. But the thing that is concerning, particularly in a state like Idaho, a lot of people get television over the air. There are people that think over-the-air television doesn't exist anymore. People in this state know it does. A lot of places I travel know it does. There are a lot of people that watch over-the-air television in cities and in rural areas. And so I think it is important that we keep a robust broadcast signal available. A lot of people in this state get their television through translators, and there is no allowance for translators. And so I think in states like this, I think this is an issue that people need to watch carefully as it rolls forward, and let elected officials know that over-the-air television is important. And if they're getting over-the-air television via a translator, which people in many parts of the state are, then they need to let their elected officials know this is important to them.
One question that came in from a viewer was whether, in their view, the pledge breaks or festivals, however you want to call them, have some annoying programming, and when will the programming get better that comes down for these festival times, for these fundraising times?
I'm not sure which programs they're talking about, because some of the programs actually come from PBS and some of them come from other places. So if they have a trouble with the festival, they should call the station.
There's a sense, I think, that there's a lot of pledging going on constantly. Now, our station is fortunate in that we don't have to do that as much.
I think your station does a really wonderful job in the way that it raises money. And I think that one of the things that we've tried to do is look at stations like this that I think do a nice job and try to understand what works for them that might be relevant to other stations. The other thing I would say is, out of this, we're trying to do more with the programs that are in our schedule on a regular basis. So out of our last drive, the two shows that did the best in our fundraising drive was Downton Abbey and Ken Burns' Civil War. It was a remastered version of the Civil War. We brought it back. So I think that there are ways that we can use our on-air fundraising to help our stations use their on-air fundraising in a way that actually doesn't irritate people but actually engages them. That is our goal.
What's left for you to do? What's still on your docket? You've been almost a decade.
Yeah, I think this is, I think I want to help public stations move through this new landscape. I'm really excited about what all the new technologies offer, but I'm also really excited about what I see as this new generation of filmmakers and storytellers coming up. We have really talented young people that are working in public media again. And we went through a period where I'm not sure that we were at the top of a lot of young people's list of places they might want to go, and that's changed a lot. It's changed a lot through, I think, the new technologies. People are really excited about using digital and using video storytelling as a way to really engage. And so that to me is really exciting. I'm really excited to find that next Ken Burns. I'm really excited to find that next generation of people who are just passionate about using media as a way to connect people together, not tear them apart. And I think that's really exciting.
Because some independents have had some consternation that PBS doesn't care about them enough, that POV and independent lens are put on hours that are difficult for folks to see.
Well, some of our stations, I think, are not as forward-looking as our station here is in Idaho about the relationship between independent film and the community. And we're involved in a really big project right now with our independent filmmakers and with our stations to try to look for opportunities to help build that relationship, because it should be strong. We do, I think we have a great relationship with independent filmmakers around the country that should be even deeper. And I think, it's very much at the core of our mission. Yeah.
This is a hard job. It's a tiring job. You travel all over the country.
It's a great job. I'm so fortunate to have it. It's a privilege.
Are you going to be staying for a while longer?
Well, they seem to like me. So, and no one has started chiseling that bust on Mount Rushmore yet. So I still think I have a little ways to go.
Well, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Marcia. It's fun to be here.
Talk with me and our viewers about your goals for PBS. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. It was fun.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank my guest, PBS President and CEO Paula Kerger. To learn more about PBS, watch this program again, or see my conversation with Ms. Kerger from 2007, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.